1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men are victims of sexual abuse. And these numbers don't highlight the disproportionate numbers of those survivors who don't report, or those survivors who may identify elsewhere on the gender spectrum. This podcast is for all of us, survivors of sexual abuse and assault, who want to experience a life worth living beyond a tragic past. My name is DJ Burr, and I'm a licensed mental health therapist, author, screenwriter, sober person, and I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. I know the complexity of healing from trauma. I also know the joy that comes from the healing process. Hear our stories and share your own. You are not alone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Journey On. Today, I am speaking with Jason Newsome. He's the author of Finding Peace in an Imperfect World, Applying God's Principles to Calm Real-Life Chaos. Jason, welcome to Journey On.
Thanks, DJ. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. Not only you're an author like myself, but you're also a survivor. And so I really appreciate you taking out the time to come talk to us about your story and about your book. Can you tell our audience where you are?
Sure. I'm in Charleston, West Virginia. So over here in the mid-Atlantic states. And been here, I guess, since the late 90s, I suppose. Been in Charleston. I grew up in West Virginia, the southern coal fields of West Virginia.
Okay.
In the middle, I say it's farther than the middle of nowhere. It's actually the end of nowhere. So that's where I grew up, and I moved to Charleston after graduating college the first time, and so sort of been here ever since.
Okay, and you run a treatment center. What's the name of your treatment center?
Yes, it's called Dayspring Counseling Center. Our counseling center is actually located in Dunbar, which is just a suburb. It's a suburb of Charleston, really. Dayspring has been open 5 years now, a little over 5 years. And so we have 3 full-time counselors there. And so, yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Now, in your treatment center, do you treat survivors of sexual abuse?
We treat both. We treat survivors of sexual abuse as well as perpetrators, and so we do both of those things. Of course, we do a lot of general mental health as well, but we're one of few places in West Virginia that we actually treat perpetrators as well.
Well, that's really curious and interesting. I'm wondering, how did that come to be with you being a survivor of sexual abuse? How did you come to also treat perpetrators, and what was that journey like?
A really bad accident.
Okay.
And I say bad accident. Hopefully it's clear that I was joking when I say that, but I mean, it really was accidental. Quite frankly, I was a medical technologist, back in up till 2006. And but in 2004, I was serving as I was the associate pastor of my church, and folks were always needing just more and more help with things that I just was way beyond any kind of pastoral training that I'd had. And so I decided that, and what would happen is I would refer folks. I would refer them to a therapist or mental health agency or what have you. I would refer them and they wouldn't go because they wanted, they wanted what they wanted. And so I decided that, with no intent to ever practice, by the way, I decided that I was just going to go get a counseling degree just so I would have the training, so I'd have at least a little bit of more knowledge, because I felt very uncomfortable with those things. And so I started working on my master's degree in counseling from Marshall University. Go Herd, by the way. I got to the practicum portion. Again, you have to remember, I have no intent to practice. I have no intention to leave my life as a medical technologist. And I got to the practicum portion of my degree, and I kind of fell in love with it, right? And so I fell in love with practice. I fell in love with um, I fell in love with along, walking alongside clients as they go through this journey of healing and recovery and all of those, great words that we use. And so I got through my practicum. Marshall University, they actually had a clinic that's where we did our practicum work. And so I got to internship. Internship's different. We won't get into all that mess. You know what I mean.
I do.
And we had to find an internship site. And you have to remember, I was a medical technologist. So I was cold calling places, trying to find an internship. And the only one that called me back, because again, I didn't know anyone in the field or anything else, the only one that called me back was an agency that did sex offender treatment. Was one of the things that they did. And so I go there for an interview as a student to see if they're going to accept me as an intern. And they tell me that, well, this is part of what you'll be doing. And quite frankly, I said, you know what? I can stand on my head for 2 semesters. I can do anything for 2 semesters of my life. And so I'm just going to suck it up, do it, get it over with. And I actually got started in it, and I kind of liked it. I didn't love the stories or anything else like that, but I just kind of liked what I was doing, and it turns out I was pretty good at it. So I just stuck with it, and so along the way, I've done a lot of trauma treatment as well. I've done a lot of treatment for victims of sexual abuse, all the way down to about age 4.
Wow.
Sometimes a little bit younger than that, but 4 is kind of my cutoff. But yeah.
Yeah, because you end up in the.
So when I say it was by accident, I really do mean it was by accident.
It sounds like it was by accident. Had you already done some of your recovery work?
I think so. I have actually tried to figure this out for myself, even. What was my process of recovery? And I really can't pin it down to any one thing. I think I have a sort of a drift theory mindset when it comes to my own recovery, that I drifted in and out of different things and just eventually ended there. One of the things that I actually talk about in chapter 1 of the book that you mentioned, is I had an encounter in 1999. I was 21 years old, or I'm sorry, 22 years old. And growing up, I had 5 different perpetrators of sexual abuse, and from about age 5 to about age 13, at different times, these 5 different perpetrators. The last one was the worst. The last one was by far the worst. Sometimes aggressive, sometimes violent, sometimes overtly violent. And so I had not told anyone about any of those things for most of my life. And I was about 16 years old. That last one was my older brother. When I say older, I mean 10 years older than me. It was his best friend.
Okay.
That best friend was older than my brother. So I don't know if he was 5 years old or 8 years. I don't know all of that. But when I was 16 years old, I told my brother about one of the sort of milder incidents. And I don't say that to minimize anybody's experience of sexual abuse, but it was one of the sort of lower level, no violence involved sort of incidents. And this was 3 years after the last incident. So, and I remember my brother not saying anything. He didn't have a word to say about it. And I think he was as much in shock as anything else. But what that told me was, just keep this to yourself. Just don't bother, right? And so I did. But that same brother died. He died from brain cancer in 1999. And again, I was 22 years old at the time. I remember I was at his funeral. And I don't know what you guys do in Seattle, but here in West Virginia, at the end of funerals, we walk up by the casket, sort of pay our last respects and those sorts of things. And so I did that. And I had walked up to my brother's casket, and I turned around, and this guy, this last perpetrator, when I turned around, we were face to face. Right?
Oh my word.
And so, and I stood there, and what I imagined. So I'm imagining this from the outside, right? So what if a video camera was watching this whole thing?
Yeah.
So I imagine from the outside, it looked like two people who knew each other, who had a common loved one lying in repose. It looked like them perhaps sharing a silent moment of grief, right? That's what I imagine that it looked like from the outside. But I remember I turned around, and this is who I come face to face with, right? And I mean, I'm at a funeral, for God's sakes, of all places, right? So what do I do at that moment in time? And but I remember very well that at that moment in time, I stood there for, it probably was 5 seconds. It felt like, 30 minutes. And I just stood there looking, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. And I remember I put my hand out and I shook his hand. I don't know what he was thinking at the time. Don't know what he was experiencing at the time. In all my work with perpetrators, I imagine it's possible he wasn't thinking anything.
Yeah.
It's possible that he wasn't even considering anything that had happened before. And so I don't know, but that wasn't the important part. And so what I think happened that day is I actually put something in his hand, and that was forgiveness.
Forgiveness.
And that has much more to do with me than him.
Had you already forgiven him prior to that moment?
Most likely.
Okay. But then it sounds like it might have been easier to move into that and shake his hand if you had already done some work around it.
Yeah. And I don't see forgiveness as a moment. It's not a moment process.
Say more about that. Say more about what you think forgiveness is.
Well, my concept of forgiveness, I'm a Christian. I'm also a minister. So I will say that my concept of forgiveness is certainly informed by my faith quite a bit. And one place that Jesus talks about forgiveness is Matthew chapter 6. And he talks about forgiveness in terms of a debt. And so the idea is that if I have wronged you, I have created a debt to you, right? And so so quite literally, I owe you something. Mm-hmm. So this idea of owing and collecting is what we see, and Jesus talked about that. Matthew 18 is actually another place where Jesus talked about that, and he talked about that in terms of, he gave this parable of the guy that owed a little bit of money, and then the guy that owed lots of money, and talked about the different levels of forgiveness with that. And so if I do wrong to you, I've now created a debt, and so now I owe you something. And so let's imagine for a moment that, and let's put it in terms of dollars, because when we talk about debt, we can sort of think about dollars easier. So if I steal $100 from you, so DJ, I come to your office and there's $100 bill laying there for whatever reason, right? You've left $100 bill laying there, and I steal it while you're going to the restroom. Okay. So, and I asked the question. So if I ask the question, what do I owe you at that point in time? Well, the easy answer is $100, but that's not really the case, right? And so I also owe you betrayal. I also owe you misunderstanding your friendship. I owe you completely broken trust. I even owe you the mistrust that you're going to have of the next person that comes into your office, right?
Yeah.
And so I get $100 is easy. I mean, it's really easy. As a matter of fact, is $100. I can't repay those other things. It's simply not something that I can do. And so if forgiveness can't ever ride on repayment, but so many times in our life, that's what we do, is we constantly seek repayment. We want to be repaid. We want to be repaid. And we do that lots of different ways. Sometimes we might seek repayment from the person, all right? And you see this in, as you're a counselor, so you've seen this when you're counseling couples, right? They never get past the last argument, whatever that one was, that argument they had 22 years ago, right? That one or the other hasn't repaid yet, right? Forgiveness is about clearing a debt. It's about me looking at you and saying, yes, you did wrong. Yes, you wronged me, but I'm going to stop seeking payment. That's really what it's about, which means I'm not going to expect you to make up for it. I'm not going to, so I'll get into real life stuff here for a moment, if it's okay.
Yes, please.
I'm not going to tell the next person, even though I've told 2,814 people already how bad my mom was to me. Right? I'm not going to tell that next person because, telling that one more person, maybe that's payment enough. Okay. I'm not going to constantly seek approval of others, as a way to make up for the whatever mess that I went through in my life, right? All of those different ways that we try to satisfy that debt that's been created, they're all damaging. They're all destructive. They lead to horrible relationships, and they lead to these patterns of dysfunction that just go on and on and on. There comes a point when I have to say, you know what? I have to realize, number one, that I'm trying to get collection on this debt. And I have to say, you know what? I'm going to stop. I'm no longer, you don't owe, as an individual, you don't owe me anything for this debt, and neither does anyone else. So you think about bankruptcy for a moment. And
all right.
So debt and forgiveness, this is what bankruptcy is all about, right? And so I remember, because I actually went through a bankruptcy too, by the way. And I won't disparage anything before me, but went through a divorce, and that was.
We all have stuff.
We'll just leave that where it is. She's not here. She's not. I'm no reason to disparage any of that. But I went through a bankruptcy, and I remember there was. It just morally and ethically, I have issues. I personally have issues with that. But there was one particular creditor, after I'd gotten back on my feet and all of those kinds of things, that I actually called them and said, "Can I pay this? Right? Can I pay what was discharged?" And they said, "No, you can't." I said, "Well, I'd really like to." "You can't. You can't do that." And so we got through this conversation, and finally I got to a supervisor, whatever. And I remember this just sweetest lady in the world. And she said, Mr. Newsome, she said, here's the thing. The debt that you're wanting to pay doesn't exist anymore. Right? It's like, that's what forgiveness is. Right? That's what the debt that you want to pay doesn't exist anymore. The debt that I'm trying to get collected, it doesn't exist anymore. So that's forgiveness.
I have to tell you, Jason, I mean, that is hard to swallow. And I know forgiveness is not about the other person, right? You know, I operate in a 12-step recovery way, right? That is my life. That is what has kept me alive. And I know there's the process that we go through, right? To, you know, in step 4, making more inventory of the things that we have done wrong. And then in step 9, you know, making amends for those things, right? And there is a process of letting go of the harms that have come to me, right? And having acceptance that those things are in the past. But I tell you, it's been 8 years since I started this journey of healing from my sexual abuse and 8 years of sobriety. And I think probably at least once a week, I am trying to seek that debt, you know, in my mind. And it just comes to me. It's not something that I think I seek out. It's just there and I feel it in my heart. How do you deal with that? Is that something that still occurs to you? Does it come up? Do you think about what was done to you? And do you even think for a moment that there's something else that you need for that healing?
Yeah. So there's a difference. So there's a difference for me. There's a difference between forgiveness and amnesia.
Okay. Yes.
So don't forget. I will never in my life. I'll never in my life forget what happened. But I also know that there's nothing that person can do. Either any of those 5 people, right? There's nothing that any of them can do to pay any of it back. It's just not possible. It's not even possible. And so since I know that, I don't feel like I have a need for anything to be refilled from that. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I also I don't feel a desire for reconciliation either, which reconciliation and forgiveness aren't the same thing, not even close. And so when I think about the things that have happened, I think about a few things. One is that I never reported it. And so one of the things that I think about is that I hope that it stopped. Right. I hope I was the last one, knowing that I may not have been.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I think about. Another thing I think about is, you know, how, and part of this probably is because I work with perpetrators. You know, I think about what damage had been done
to them.
And it's kind of misleading, though. I mean, before I even finish that sentence, let me pop another one in there. It's a little bit misleading that the majority of sexual abuse perpetrators have been sexually abused. That's actually not true.
In your experience, that's not true.
Right, in my experience, but also, you know, current research would say that. Current research would say about 35% have. Now, here's the problem, though, is when you start adding things in like physical abuse, neglect, death of a parent, absent parent, you start adding those ACEs, right? Those adverse experiences that we talk about so much. When you start adding those in, you get into the 80% range.
Right.
So it's disrupted attachment is the issue. or at least part of the issue, it's not the whole issue, but it's certainly part of the issue, is disrupted attachment. And so sometimes I'll think about those things. I wonder, and sometimes I know, and for a few of them, for probably let's see, two and a half of them. So I'll say two and a half because I know a little bit about one's, personal background. And so, I know some of the things that have happened in their life. And I don't know if sexual abuse happened, but there's two of them I know for sure that physical abuse happened. The third one, I strongly suspect it, but the third one also I know went through neglect issues, and so those kinds of things. And so sometimes I'll think about that, but I wouldn't say. And so there's really two parts to that question, I guess. But the other side is I don't really think about it that much. Even when working with a perpetrator and hearing a story that's very similar to my own, I wouldn't say I think about it very much.
Mm-hmm. You know what I think about? I think about wanting to make sure, and I know I don't have any control over this, but wanting to make sure that other people aren't harmed. And if they have been harmed, that they know that, one, that I did report it. It was so many years later, right? I reported it maybe 4 years ago, and it happened when I was 15, 16. But I wanted it to be in the record, right? In case anyone ever showed up to the police department, right? But one of the things that keeps coming up for me is like, if there's other people, I want them to know that they're not alone, but I can't, one, I don't know if there's other people. Two, I can't go get a billboard and put it up, right? I guess I could, but it'd be, I think, a waste of money. And three, I just want to make sure that it never happens to someone else. And I have no control over that. And that is what is just, it gnaws at me at sometimes, right? Because as part of my healing was trying to get control of everything. And that was part of what got me into my addictive life and engaging in addictive behaviors. And so if that's one thing that still lingers for me, is that. And I wish I could just erase that part. But I think that part also makes me human and empathetic,
Sure.
That yeah. I want to help protect people from harm. And it's hard.
It is hard. That's one of my motivations for working with perpetrators.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like, look, unfortunately, most of our prevention measures haven't worked. Yeah. Or else I'd be out of a job. So,
right.
Nothing else. There's no other measure. There's one. But if we can take known offenders and help them not do it again, then that's sort of how I see my role in prevention. Right. And we have, I personally, my wife and I also, we run a transitional living program in Charleston called Operation Whosoever. And we took it over just as a matter of, sort of community service. We get nothing from it. We like no one gets a salary from it or anything like that. And it's all self-funded. But we provide housing for individuals who are coming out of prison who don't have a place to live. And the vast majority of time, in fact, all 31 of our residents right now are all sex offenders. Because the situation is, they have residency restrictions anyway.
Yeah.
And so, and also their families, many of them don't want anything to do with them anymore.
Yeah. And that's sad too.
Yeah. We provide housing for them to help them get on their feet. After they get out of prison, they can get a job and they can sort of head on that path to getting stability. Because what we also know is that stability is a huge factor for it's a huge protective factor for recidivism. And so if we can help provide a little bit of stability, then, we're actually helping to prevent future sexual abuse. So, got a lot of things going on around that
You
work.
do. You do. And do the people who live in the transitional housing, do they also seek treatment in your facility?
There are probably a couple of our guys that may come to our facility. Everyone in West Virginia, if they're on supervision and they've committed a sexual crime, then they have to be involved in treatment.
Oh, good.
Whether they're on parole or probation.
Excellent.
And, yeah, we have some really good community supervision protocols for those situations in West Virginia. I feel like they're really, really good. And I think they do a good job. So, so that's required if they're on supervision. Almost everyone in our facility is on parole or probation. Well, I'd say parole, but some of them are on probation now. They've transitioned. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I think that's great. I think treatment is necessary. I do believe that people have the capacity to change. I do think that a lot of our services are underfunded, right?
Sure.
And are not equipped with the necessary tools to help perpetrators and survivors, right? And so what you're doing is a great service to your community. That's awesome.
And that's really why we do it. And that's not to blow my own horn, because I'm way past that. But that really is why we do it. It's just a service to the community. And the other thing is let's be real about it. And so I was going to say nowhere, but there are a few places where these guys can go and actually experience someone caring for them, caring about them, caring what happens to them, even caring about their story or anything like that. There are very few places in the world that these guys can go for that. And
yeah, I believe that.
One of the things that we provide, I tell my my congregation from time to time that, and I don't know your faith background, or if you have one. If you don't, well, it's fine with me, by the way. So you just throw all my disclaimers out. So, but I tell my congregation from time to time that nothing will challenge your belief in the gospel more than sitting with someone who's done some of the most evil things that we can imagine. And so that's me experiencing working with these guys. It really challenges and perhaps solidifies, my belief in the gospel more. So it will challenge your beliefs about grace. It will challenge your beliefs about forgiveness. It will challenge all of those things. And so for that part, I'm personally grateful, to be able to work with them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I can understand that. I'm curious if people, well, you're a published author. You speak on these topics. Do the people who come seek treatment from you, do they come in knowing your story, or is that something you share with them?
I don't normally share with them. And I don't do a lot of treatment these days either. So,
okay.
I do a little bit, but not a lot. I don't share a lot with them. It's not, I mean, I guess over the years, there's been a few times that I have. There would usually have to be a specific purpose for me to do that, but
yeah, I mean that would be the most clinically appropriate thing.
Right.
But I was curious, with you having this book, Because for me, a lot of people come into my practice seeking me out because they have picked up my book, they have read it, and they come in and then they're like, okay, so in your book you said this, and I'm like, oh, you know,
I get that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I don't have a lot of that. Most of my referrals and things come because, I'm an expert here in West Virginia on these things. And so I do a lot of forensic work for the courts and those sorts
yeah.
of. And so we're the largest treatment provider for sex offender treatment in the state.
Okay.
So we have two of our counselors travel to other locations. And so we have office in Huntington, and we have office in Huntington and Ripley, which are about an hour from our central office. And so, and even down south in the state, a place called Logan, which is also about an hour. So we have these four different locations that we open at different times during the week. So we're the largest provider in the state. And so most of my referrals just come by virtue of that.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe you will get some referrals from one of our listeners, right?
Right, that'd be great.
Yeah, because your book's out there. It's online. It's Finding Peace in an Imperfect World, Applying God's Principles to Calm Real Life Chaos, and it's on Amazon.
It is.
What last message of hope could you give to my listeners when it comes to recovering from early childhood sexual abuse?
One of the things that I would say is that healing is possible. Healing is possible. But it's only possible if I get out of my own way of healing.
Oh, yeah, necessary.
Yeah. And so I have to stop. Reopening the wound all the time. And I have to do my own work. And this is really going to be much more harsh than I intended to sound. But I have to stop seeing myself as a victim. And I have to start seeing myself as a capable human being who's capable of healing. Can I tell one more story?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we got time. Go ahead.
That sort of illustrates this point. I was 11 years old, and in a place called Dingus, West Virginia, building standards for people's houses weren't quite up to code back then. And my friend and I, we were at a mutual friend's house. We were all playing, and he was standing on the porch of the house, and I came running around the house, and there was no rails on the porch or anything. And so I came running around the house, and I slapped him in the back of the leg and inadvertently pulled him off the porch, and he landed on his arm. And his arm was broken. Like, it was one of those nasty breaks too. It's like makes an S curve in the bone. Just
ouch,
nasty, disgusting break, right? So we get him to his mom and all this stuff. They go to the emergency room. He gets a cast put on, and he comes to my house. Like, he came back to my house before he even went home. So I was the first one to sign his cast. But here's the thing: is that I broke his arm. I was completely responsible for it. He didn't ask for it. He didn't want it to happen. He didn't hope it happened. He didn't have any responsibility whatsoever. I was 100% responsible for breaking his arm. However, I was 0% responsible for his healing. Absolutely 0% responsible for his healing. He didn't want the broken arm. He didn't ask for it. He didn't hope for it, but it was still his.
Yeah.
There's a person out there listening today that you have a broken arm that you didn't ask for. And that broken arm came into your life because of sexual abuse. But it's still your broken arm. You have to do the work. You have to do the healing. You're responsible for that. There's not another person in your life that can wear that cast for you. There's not another person in your life who can take care of all of the things that you need to do to heal that wound. No one can do that. You have to do it. And so you have to stop seeing yourself as a victim. Stop seeing yourself as perpetually injured, and engage in your healing yourself.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that 1,000%. Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate you coming on to Journey On and sharing your experience and your knowledge. And once again, listeners, go out and get Jason Newsome's book, Finding Peace in an Imperfect World, Applying God's Principles to Calm Real Life Chaos. Jason, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Journey On. I hope this story will help you on your healing journey. I want to hear from you. Leave me a message at anchor.fm/journeynonpod/message, and I might be able to respond to you on a future episode. Tweet me at @TheDJBurr. Follow me on Instagram at @TheDJBurr. Like the Journey On Facebook page at facebook.com/journeynonpod, and join our survivor community at facebook.com/journeynonsurvivors. Till next time. The music in this episode is by Conduit, Matthew Ortega. Learn more at www.condewit.com. That's conduit.com.